Amen. Okay, so if you've been watching my other presentations, we've done a couple already now on the theme is the 7 times of Leviticus 26, and we're looking at the duration interpretation of that. So that means the 25-20. Last time I presented, which was about a month ago, we did William Miller's interpretation of the 25-20 and had a look at some of the different things that led to him predicting 1843. So I'll just revise that quickly and then we'll get into today's content. Okay, so William Miller has chosen to start his 25-20 at the year 677 BC, taking the capture of Manasseh as the start of that period. We went through those reasons last time. So he's got, from there to there is the 25-20. He's got a 1260 there, and then he's got 2 sections that he's called paganism. They're combining them to add up to 1260. So he's got 2 1260s that way. And then, so 25-20 was just one of about 4 different time prophecies that he had that all led to 1843, which he then had, they put on the chart in order to do preaching and speaking and using that as a visual aid. Okay, so there's some of the different time prophecies that led him to do that. And then the 25-20 itself was not just based on Leviticus 26. There was a number of things that led him to interpret that time period of 7 times as 25-20. So that just summarised, but there was just various reasons. He used type and anti-type, and he was looking at Nebuchadnezzar 7 times and various other things that gave him the 25-20. So it wasn't just a really basic thing, it was quite involved. I had a fair few witnesses for it. So that's where he was. So that's where we kind of left off last time I presented. So moving forward from there, today I want to talk about the controversies of this. So in this time period, the 25-20 caused a controversy in that it contributed to this number being put on the chart. And we'll see once they started doing that, naming a specific time, we started to get controversy. So we'll talk about that. I want to just talk about time setting. And then the main part of my presentation is going to be about Hiram Edson's articles that he writes and his point of view on the 25-20 and the controversy that that created. And then finally, if we get time, a little bit about the 1863 rejection of 25-20 as a whole. Just going into the time setting. Because the 25-20 is about duration, so that means it's about time setting and it means it's going to be controversial. The chart brought controversy in the Millerite period. I'll just read to you from early writings. All right. So just quoting now. The preaching of definite time called forth great opposition from all classes, from the minister in the pulpit down to the most reckless, heaven-daring sinner. No man knoweth the day nor the hour, was heard from the hypocritical minister and the bold scoffer. Neither would be instructed and corrected by those who were pointing to the year when they believed the prophetic periods would run out, and to the signs which showed Christ is near, even at the doors. Many shepherds of the flock who professed to love Jesus said that they had no opposition to the preaching of Christ's coming, but they objected to the definite time. Yeah. God's all-seeing eye read their hearts. They did not love Jesus near. And I'll read another quote from Life Sketches. Okay. And this just shows sort of 1842 is when the chart was made and started to be used. And so you see a change taking place here. In June 1842, Mr. Miller gave his second course of lectures at the Casco Street Church in Portland. Skipping forward a little. This second course created much more excitement in the city than the first. With few exceptions, the different denominations closed the doors of their churches against Mr. Miller. Many discourses from the various pulpits sought to expose the alleged fanatical errors of the lecturer. But crowds of anxious listeners attended his meetings and many were unable to enter the house. So we can see here that it's obviously creating a bit of a stir. So yeah, all right. So this is what's going on. Okay, so it's dividing people. Now these people here, they're saying it's okay to say, you know, we want Jesus to come back, but we don't like you naming a particular time. That's fanaticism. And people on this side are saying, well, we'll see what they're saying. So just go forward to another quote. If we go to Great Controversy, page 370, paragraph 2. There's a short quote, I've just snipped out the main phrases there, but it says, no man knoweth the day nor the hour was the argument most often brought forward by rejectors of the Advent faith. And then if you skip forward, we say that the people on this side were giving clear and harmonious explanations of the text. And also that one saying of the Saviour must not be made to destroy another. So they both have their Bibles. All right, so this group here were giving explanations for why they didn't think that that verse applied in this context. Now, we also have another quote from Great Controversy 88, page 456, paragraph 2. page 88. And this quote is, "The preaching of a definite time for the judgment in the giving of the first message was ordered of God." And that's what I wanted to highlight, that it was ordered of God. The computation of the prophetic periods on which that message was based, placing the close of the 2,300 days in the autumn of 1844, stands without impeachment. So Ellen White is giving her stamp of approval and says that God had ordained this time setting here in this context. So people who Seventh-day Adventists and people who believe Ellen White would need to accept that time setting was valid and appropriate at that time. But whereas other denominations argue that this whole scenario in the Great Disappointment is a really important lesson for Christians everywhere to never set any dates whatsoever. Seventh-day Adventists would need to accept that at least at this instance, time setting was appropriate. So yeah, and I just wanted to bring that up. That's really all I'm going to go into. But just that we see similar dynamics today. We see inspiration. Oftentimes now it's Ellen White quotes being used. Different phrases being used and pulled out to prove that time setting today is not appropriate. We might then say that on this side, we might argue that one saying must not be made to destroy another. We need to do deep study of scripture and inspiration, not shallow. We need to consider the meaning of when something is said, what was meant, the context, the application, and the dispensation. We need to ensure the inspired statements are not being made to destroy one another. And I'll also point out that this quote, "No man knoweth the day nor the hour," is used by Ellen White herself to argue against time setting in a various dispensation to a various group of people. So she used this quote to argue against time setting also. So it was interesting to note. So I think it's just important to consider that things are complicated, and then we can see, obviously we can see things repeating as well when the histories repeat. So moving on from there, I want to go into Edson's articles. So I'm just going to clean this. Okay, so I just wrote that up ahead of time to save us a little bit of time. Edson's articles, very, very interesting. I hope you enjoyed this study. Okay, so I've written up the outline of what I'm going to do with Edson just to save a little bit of time. I'm going to start off with, I've broken up his document. It's quite long. There's, when I printed it, it was about 50 pages. So it's not a really small study, it's quite a long one. So I broke it up into sections because it's got more in there than I anticipated. It's quite deep and involved, so similar to Miller, I guess. Okay, so first section we'll look at, he just basically says, I disagree with William Miller's application of the 2520. These are the dates that I think are correct. So I'm saying this is right and his one was wrong. So we'll look at that quickly. Oh, it might not be quick. Then next section that he really goes into is really interesting story about how Gabriel had taught Daniel through a process. Basically, he ends up teaching Daniel the 25-20 and how Gabriel had done that while Daniel was alive. So we'll talk about that story. I thought that was interesting. After that, we'll talk about how he argues that 1798 is a repeat of history. It's the second Exodus, so repeating that history under Moses. 1798 and the passing of the purple is got to do with the power play interchange between, we'll say, Napoleon and the papacy, and the passing of the purple representing the power control that they had going back and forth, and how that has to do with 1798. Then there's a section about the scarlet beast and the heads of the beast and how he applies all of that. And so he'll tell you who all the different heads represent. And then in the summary and his conclusion of his piece, that 1798 was the beginning of gathering of God's people. So that's where we're going to go, hopefully, if we have time. I don't know, might have to split this up if we don't get time. So first of all, to understand the context of when this article happened, I'll just draw up the lines that we've just had a look at this morning as well with Elder Tess, and we'll put the location of this, these articles that Edson wrote on that line so you know where it's happening. All right, so these are the lines that we have been working with of late, the dates on there, and you'll see Edson is in this history here. Now this history here would be between Sunday law and close of probation, and we would normally expect there to be an increase of knowledge and a loud cry in that dispensation. So I'm not going to put him exactly where he is in that time period, but he was in 1856, these documents were written. So he wrote in 1856. So this would be the latter rain. And also the harvest of the world. Okay, so that just gives you an idea of where he is in the time. And I also want to read another quote, so that'll be okay, so Review and Herald, June 10, 1852, paragraph 2. Okay, many who profess to be looking for the speedy coming of Christ are becoming conformed to this world and seek more earnestly the applause of those around them than the approbation of God. They are cold and formal, like the nominal churches from which they but a short time since separated. The words addressed to the Laodicean church describe their present condition perfectly. So I just want to mark that Ellen White is referring to God's people here as in a Laodicean state, and she's writing this in 1852. So we'll mark that by 1856 at least they're in a Laodicean condition. Okay, so that just gives a context for what's going on in the church at the time. Now I'll just list some other interesting features of it. So he published in January and February 1856, so the beginning of the year. There were 7 articles, so it's been split up. It was always to be continued, and you had to sort of you look at the next magazine until you got the next part of the story, I suppose, and also it never got finished, so it sort of cuts short abruptly at the end, and it said to be continued, but there was no more. Whereas Miller's work was all about 1844, Edson is all about 1798. Everything he talks about has to do with 1798. In his article, in his introduction, he talks about how busy he was. He said, I've been very busy, I'm extremely worn out, I've had little disposition to write. Just see that this situation that most of them are finding themselves in, they're very exhausted, they're worn out and tired. So in this context, he's been preparing this study and writing it. Having said all that, it's a very intensive study with many references, and it's a really big, complicated piece of work. So I think he did very well, considering he was so worn out and tired and consumed by family and other affairs that he had in his life. He puts the articles out there, is really asking for peer review. He's put this study together, he's putting it forward, and he's asking for people of skill and understanding to investigate it further, to revise it and improve on it. It's really his hope that they'll take it and run with it. So it seems as though that didn't happen, but that was what he was hoping for. He wasn't sort of claiming to have everything sorted and done. He sort of was hoping that it would be developed. Other interesting features of his work, you will find if you read it, he's using a lot of Miller's methodology. He's using a lot of proof texting and applying type and anti-type. He uses the testimony of 2 witnesses to justify his position, at least on 2 occasions, giving 2 different witnesses to support something. He uses reform lines, what really is reform lines, and taking an alpha history and applying it to the omega history. He identifies the wonderful numberer and Pulmoni to support his case that time prophecies were being given, and that the wonderful numberer is the proof to say that this is to do with time. Daniel 11:40, the him in that verse he interprets as the papacy and not Napoleon. He's very direct that the daily is referring to paganism, and he's also quite clear that the glorious land is the United States. We're going to look at this, but it's very interesting how he interprets the mistake on the chart, on the 1843 chart. And also another interesting feature is that the time period that we would call 46 years, from 1798 to 1844, Edson repeatedly calls it 45 years. So one wonders how he's calculated that. So we'll have a little look at that. But that was an interesting feature of his work as well. So that was just all to introduce it. I can list where you can, like, the dates of these articles as well. if anybody wants to have a look at that and look it up, that's where you'll find them all. It's also interesting that there's 7 articles, so if you're going to pick a number, 7, it's interesting. I'm going to clean, so if you can take a photo. Okay. Okay, so the first section, the first section that we're going to look at is this one here. And really, you would just sum it up with saying maybe you could look at it this way, but Miller was wrong. I have a better answer. He really is going to be looking at this verse here, Isaiah 11:11. If you want to turn to it, you can. It's Isaiah chapter 11, verse 11. And it shall come in that day that the Lord shall set his hand again the second time to recover the remnant of his people, which shall be left. So you can hear that he's got the Lord shall set again. He set his hand again the second time. So he's picking up on that there's a second time and a first time. And we'll go into that a bit more later as well. So he's got the first time. He's going to argue the first time God set his hand to deliver his people is when they came out of Egypt. And the second time God set his hand to deliver his people is 1798 when they came out of 2520. So. Okay, it's very clear that Israel is not literal physical Jews, it's spiritual application, and it applies to him and his people in that time. So therefore, you can apply the verse to them. Yep, so 1798 is a fulfillment of that verse, Isaiah 11:11. So when this deliverance happened in 1798, he'll list lots of other prophecies that he says are fulfilled. The second deliverance of Isaiah 11:11, the end of the times of the Gentile from Luke 21, the last end of the indignation, Daniel 8:19, the set time of Psalms 102, and the end of the 7 times of Leviticus 26. And there's more. So he just lists lots of prophecies that have been fulfilled in 1798. Okay. Now he's giving criticisms of Miller's application. So I'll write some of them down. going to argue that if God's people are delivered at the end of the 7 times, you don't see anything in 1844 that indicates any kind of deliverance of God's people. But in 1798, nobody would dispute that. You can see a historical event of deliverance. So that's one point. Okay, he's arguing that the captivity of God's people is a captivity of the host, the people, not the sanctuary. So he's saying that the application of 1844 is not to do with the people, it's to do with the sanctuary, and another date refers to the people. He's also talking about the government was broken. So when you see the actual government being broken of Israel as a whole, you see that in 723 BC, not 677 BC. He's saying the scattering began in 723 BC, not 677 BC. So when it began, it happened with the Northern Kingdom in 723. He's looking at the prophecy of Isaiah 7 verse 8. And if you want to read along, you can. Isaiah 7:8. It's a 65-year prophecy that was given. It says, "For the head of Syria is Damascus, and the head of Damascus is Rezin, and within 65 years shall Ephraim be broken, that it be not a people." So he's pointing out that this time prophecy, it was required to be within 65 years, not necessarily at 65 years. And it's talking about Ephraim and Syria. So he's applying this verse to the beginning of his pick for the 2520 being 723 BC. So all of those things together, he basically makes this case and gives an alternate line. So I'll put them up there. And also show how he's done the 21260s as well. And the reason I'm just drawing this up is, okay, Edson has seen that there's two 1260s, paganism and papalism. It's all very neat. It all adds up to 2520. Miller had seen the two 1260s adding up to 2520, but he had it split up. And Edson's argument is this can't be right because we never see paganism reintroduced as like the official national religion. After the Dark Ages, we don't see that ever in history, so it can't be paganism there. That's his argument, it's not mine, but that's how he's going to argue against Miller's view. He's not saying we're both right or we're both seeing different perspectives. He's just saying I'm right and he's wrong. So that's how he interprets that. Now we're going to look at the mistake on the chart. Okay, I'll read a quote. Okay, so this is from his articles. It says, "The Advent chart of 1843 without doubt was arranged in the order of God's counsel. For perfection of knowledge and understanding, all parts of the inspired volume had not then been attained. Knowledge is still increasing. It is evident that God saw fit to suffer a mistake in some of the figures on the 43 chart, but for wise purposes hid that mistake until the proper time arrived for that mistake to be developed." He's going to argue that now in 1856 is when that mistake is going to be revealed. He's going to argue that it's not 1843 that's the mistake, it's 677 BC that's the mistake. He's not saying there's two mistakes, he's saying 1843 is correct, but 677 BC is wrong. He gives a tick of approval to everything else. That's right, that's right. Correct, 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 correct. And that's wrong, and Edson's here to basically make that known, and that this is the increase of knowledge, because he says knowledge is still increasing. So that's how he sees the mistake in some of the figures. Now, how can he justify 1843, you might wonder? Okay, so I'll just draw it up to illustrate how he's saying it's right. Okay, so that's how he's visualising it. William Miller didn't take into account the year zero or the fullness of the year with the BC AD problem, which we talked about last time. So he ends up sort of directing you to 1843 in both cases. But Edson's going to say that the calculation is correct. You just need to see it this way. It's the fullness of the year issue, really. There's 1843 years in between 0 and 1844, and from spring of this date to spring of this date, these numbers still apply. And if you move them forward to fall, and then shift them all half a year, you still have 1,843 years, even from, so if it was from 0 to the beginning of 1844, or if it was halfway through the first year to halfway through after 1844, it's still going to be 1843 years in this section. So the calculations on the chart are actually correct, but it should have been maybe visualised this way rather than the way it was done there. So that's how he's going to argue 1843 is totally legitimate. The calculations are fine. He gives a tick, but you need to see it this way. And if you consider the mistake that was from spring to fall, that's not on the charts anyway. That was never written up on the chart, so there's no mistake on that point either. So I hope that's clear. But that's how he explains his interpretation of what the mistake is. Yeah. Okay, now I'm going to try to address the 45 years, 46 years issue. It's tricky, but I've got a few ways of maybe thinking about it. One option is that he just can't add, but I don't think that that's the case. Or it could just be a simple mistake, but I don't know. I'm not really convinced because it's such a well thought out article, and I'm not inclined to believe that it was just a simple error, but I don't have the full answer on why this happens. Okay, so that's how we calculate it. You just find the difference between the years. It's 46 years from 1798 to 1844. I have some clues to why he's saying it's 45 years. One is that the way he's calculated it is to take the 1335 and take away the 1290, which is 45 years. Okay, so there's no 0 year involved in these calculations, so you can't blame that either. That all sounds good, except that he talks about the 1335 prophecy ending in the same year as the 2300 day prophecy. So he's really saying it ends in 1844. Of course, we could probably put some of this down to the calendar differences between the Karaite calendar and the Roman calendars that may explain it. But yeah, he's pretty clear. It's 1335 minus 1290 is 45. But he's also talking about 1844 is the end of the 45 time prophecy. So he does say 1798 to 1844 is 45 years. So I have a few other thoughts. So if you look at it as each year as a time period, and you're going from the end of 1798 to the beginning of 1844, which is where the 1335 takes you anyway. If you take the end of 1798 to there, you get 45 years, but Napoleon was taken earlier in 1798, not at the end, so I don't know about that theory. Another theory is that if you look at a 2-year period, which is, I think, quite a good, maybe a good way of looking at it. It's another possible way of looking at it. The deadly wound and the death happened over a 2-year period, and we've got the first and second disappointments happening over a 2-year period. So it's a 45-year difference between those two blocks of time. It's another way of maybe explaining his interpretation. I'm not sure. We do know that the numbers 45 and 46 are both prophetic numbers. So we can see a tension here between those two numbers. There could be some prophetic significance to him using that number. I don't know. It could be a perspective that he's got, could be just a mistake, but it's there and he uses it repeatedly, and he never says 46 as the time of gathering. So just put it out there. So yeah, that ends point 1. So I might open it up now. Does anybody have any questions at this point about anything I've just spoken about? You can unmute, you can put it in the chat. If not, that's fine, it means that you understand and we can move on. I'll wipe the board and come back and have a look. Okay, so we've got half an hour or so to go, and we're just finished point 1. So looks like we won't be doing this for a little while yet, which is fine. Yeah, we'll just keep going until we get through it all. All right, so point 2. Okay, this is a really interesting part, Daniel and Gabriel in 1798. So we're going to have a look at the book of Daniel. Okay, so Hiram Edson dedicates quite a significant portion of his works to this point. And in order to go through the process, you have to forget everything you already know. You have to imagine you're Daniel back in his day. Think like Daniel did. What was Daniel? What did he know? What did he not have any idea about? Certainly he had no idea about the scale of the time period that this indignation would go for. And it keeps saying that the time was long and he had to learn that. But we find that this, he's going to explain that it would have been so overwhelming for Daniel to be told the answer straight out suddenly. It was actually given to him bit by bit in pieces so that he could come to terms with things, this, I guess, bad news in stages. He uses an interesting, like, I don't know what word uses, a metaphor or something, of the key, a lock and a secret to explain how this process was revealed to Daniel. So. So Daniel is going to reveal the secret to Daniel. So if we think about Daniel 8:14, there was a question and the answer was, the question was about the sanctuary and the host, but the answer in Daniel 8:14 is about the sanctuary. And Edson makes the point that Daniel was only given the answer about the sanctuary at that point. There wasn't an answer about the host, but that Gabriel's intention was to teach him about the host. The indignation against the host. So when he's asking how long, basically the secret here is about how long it's going to be for the host. And I will also point out that in Daniel chapter 9 verse 11, it says, yea, this is Daniel's prayer, yea, all Israel have transgressed thy law, even by departing, that they might not obey thy voice. Therefore the curse is poured upon us, and the oath that is written in the law of Moses, the servant of God, because we have sinned against him. And this is proof really that Daniel is here, he's praying, and he's talking about the curse that's upon his people. So he recognises that this curse from the law of Moses is upon his people, and he wants to know basically how much longer that's going to go for. Right. And also in this time period here, you read that. Hopefully you can read that. It's a bit small. Can you read that? Just set a chat. Is that writing too small? Can you see that, Jason, on the screen, on the TV? Can you read the small writing? Oh, yeah. Okay. All right, we'll go on. Yeah, so in this time period when this is going on, we're grouping these chapters together. Daniel does his prayer and Gabriel gives him a pledge. So in Daniel chapter 8, verse 19, he said, behold, I will make thee know what shall be in the last end of the indignation, for at the time appointed the end shall be. And Edson's very clear that this is a serious pledge by Gabriel and he has to keep it. He can't not keep his pledge. So it's Gabriel's job to make known to Daniel when it's going to end for the host. All right, so then we go to Daniel 10-12 because the answer is not given. The answer to this question about the host is not given in Daniel's 8 and 9. So therefore it must be somewhere in Daniel's 10-12. somewhere in Daniel 10 to 12, we're going to get the key, or Daniel will get the key. This is 4 years later, and in verse 1 it says, well, actually I'll start with Daniel 10 verse 21. If you want to read along, you may. Daniel 10 verse 21. Gabriel says, "But I will show thee that which is noted in the scripture of truth." And that's referring to, he's saying it's a definite article. It's talking about something they've already talked about. The scripture of truth being about the curse of Moses. "And there is none that holdeth with me in these things but Michael your prince." And that's to say, that's the verse he uses to prove that Daniel doesn't know yet everything. We find when we go back a few verses in chapter 10 verse 1, it says, "In the 3rd year of Cyrus king of Persia, a thing was revealed unto Daniel, whose name was called Belteshazzar, and the thing was true, but the time appointed was long, and he understood the thing, and he had understanding of the vision." So verse 1, it says he has understanding, but Edson is explaining that it's a summary, that by the end of this whole vision episode, chapters 10 to 12, by the end of that, Daniel understood everything. And that's how the chapter 10 is introduced. But he doesn't actually know until the end of chapter 12. So I don't know, hopefully that makes sense. It says at the beginning, but it's just telling you that by the end of 12, he understands everything. And he's told in Daniel 12, verse 4, "But thou, O Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book even to the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall be increased." So at the end, Daniel finds out the secret of the host, how long the indignation is going to be, but he's going to seal it up and keep that a secret. That's the argument that Edson's making in his articles here. All right, so he's just proving that. Even in verse 14 of chapter 10, Gabriel says, "Now I am come to make thee understand what shall befall thy people, i.e. the host, in the latter days, for yet the vision is for many days." So even in chapter 10, you can see that Gabriel, by 14, is still trying to make Daniel understand. So we can see he doesn't understand everything in verse 1. He's still being taught. And then he's going to say, chapter 10 is just the introduction for this section. So by the end of chapter 10, you really don't get the information, you don't get any key. It's going to be in chapters 11 and 12. And in chapter 11, verse 2, Gabriel says, "And now will I show thee the truth." So now he's really going to launch into it. And how is he going to give Daniel the key? He's going to I'm going to visualize it this way because I think it will help us to understand the key better. I'm going to split the key up into 2 halves and sort of give 2 halves of a key, and then they'll fit together and make a device really that he can unlock the time prophecy with. So okay, that's me cutting the key in half. He's going to give events first. All right, so we've got Daniel 11 verse, Daniel 11 verse 31 is when Daniel is going to get the first part of the key. It's, "And arms shall stand on his part, and they shall pollute the sanctuary of strength, and shall take away the daily sacrifice, and they shall place the abomination that maketh desolate." So we've got the placing of the abomination that maketh desolate. That's the first event. And then he gets a second event in Daniel 11:35. And some of them of understanding shall fall to try them, and to purge, and to make them white, even to the time of the end, because it is yet for a time appointed. So he's going to get this event here at the end. I'll read the next verse as well. And the king shall do according to his will, and he shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every god, and that means kings here, at least according to Edson, and shall speak marvellous things against the God of gods, and shall prosper till the indignation be accomplished, for that is determined shall be done. So these verses show Daniel what marks the end of the indignation, the event. It's the time of the end. The indignation is going to be accomplished after this particular king, this abomination, has been placing himself above every other god or other kings, being supreme. So he gets these two events, the beginning of the abomination of desolation and the end of the abomination of desolation, and he's told that this is the last end of indignation, and this is when the indignation is accomplished. Yeah. Okay, yeah. So hopefully that's clear. All right, so he's given him two events, but Daniel still doesn't understand anything about how long. We find in Daniel 11, it's full of events, and Daniel 12 is full of times. So events are in 11 and times are in Daniel 12. So Daniel's been given some key events, now he's going to get given the times. That's the other half of the key. All right, so that's what remains for Daniel. Okay, so in Daniel 12, we see the question, how long, in verse 6. And one said to the man clothed in linen, which was upon the waters of the river, how long shall it be to the end of these wonders? And in verse 7, the answer is given. And I heard the man clothed in linen, which was upon the waters of the river, when he held up his right hand and his left hand unto heaven, and swear by him that liveth for ever, that it shall be or continue for a time, times and a half. And when he shall have accomplished to scatter the power of the holy people, all these things shall be finished. So I've highlighted all these things shall be finished at the end of the scattering, because the word scatter is in there, and time, times and a half is given. So it's given time, times and a half, it's given 3.5 times. Okay. But Edson's going to say it's not enough for him to know 3.5 times, because he doesn't know the manner of time. He doesn't know what manner of times, what does times mean? And the word times is ambiguous. It doesn't necessarily mean a year. It can mean appointed times. It's used in different ways. So then it comes to really the climax of everything. We get 4 important verses from Daniel 8 onwards. Daniel 8, Daniel says, what? How long? He's still asking how long. I don't understand. So he's asking for more help. So in Daniel 12 verse 8, it says, and I heard, but I understood not. Then said I, oh my Lord, what shall be the end of these things? And Edson is going to explain that when he says, what shall be the end of these things, he's talking about how long, because what here means how long. That's like an equivalent term when he says that. So he's really saying how long until the end of these things. To prove himself on this point, he takes you to 1 Peter chapter 1, verses 10 to 11. And he says, this verse proves that what here equals how long. And that verse says this, of which salvation the prophets have inquired and searched diligently, who prophesied of the grace that should come unto you, searching what, or what manner of time the Spirit of Christ, which was in them, did signify. So you see there that what, or what manner of time, is given there as like a proof text. So Daniel's still asking, and so he needs something else. In Daniel 12 verse 9, he's told he needs to keep it a secret until the time of the end. In Daniel 12:10, the next verse, he's going to be told that the wise will understand. And then the final part of the puzzle is given in verse 11. It's the second time key. It is the 1290 days. So in verse 11, and from the time that the daily sacrifice shall be taken away, and the abomination that maketh desolate set up, there shall be 1,290 days. Okay. So the key word here really is it's expressed in days. It's linking the first event to time. So we've got this same verse also tells you that it's from when the abomination is set up. So it's got a link to this date. The other one had a link to the end, and it's telling you that it's 1,290 days. And I think the word day here is key because Daniel would have known Ezekiel and Numbers. And at this point, it's just going to say, it's going to click in Daniel's mind. He's been told the time is long. He's going to realise he needs to use day for a year. And then he will know how many days in a month, and he will know how many to add that all up to. And he's going to realise that it's going to add up to 1,290 years. So that then gives you, this event becomes a time period because it's going to change 3.5 times into 1260 years. Okay, and this is what's going to begin the unlocking process. He's got, we can now change that to, it'll make a mess of the board, but it's going to end up 1260 years and 1290 years, and there's the 30 years. Everything's years. It's really, really long. He's probably standing here hoping that he's near the end, but he's going to find out that this period here of this abomination of desolation, which he's concerned about the little horn. He knows there's a few beasts before that, and then there's going to be this stage, and now he's finding out that we're talking about a really, really long time. So, you know, that's difficult. And now this just unlocks the whole chain for Daniel. Okay, so if the 3.5 times is called the last end, Edson will tell you that that's really the last half of the indignation. So he's going to realise that there's another half. There's a first end or a first half. And the curse, it's spoken of in Leviticus 26 as 7 times. So he should then realise that there's 3.5 and a 3.5 amounting to 7. Okay, so I might just draw up, can you take a picture of that? And then I'll just do it up again a little bit neater. Okay. Just wanted to draw it on a bit of a bigger scale because I just wanted to show that when he realises that there's a 3.5 here, that this is the last end. And this is the first. Daniel's probably standing somewhere there, somewhere really, really early on in this. And he's not standing near the end, he's actually standing quite far back. And this time here. It's really long. He doesn't have the dates necessarily, but he knows it's really far. I mean, you won't know about the calendar, but he should know the duration, according to Edson. So that's the process that he goes through as Gabriel has given him. Really the 1290 was the last piece of the puzzle. It unravels the 1260. It gives you the 7 times. And Daniel realises that this is just huge. Also, Daniel knows that when the indignation is over, you should expect a time of blessing. He knows that his people were promised blessing after their captivity. So he knows that here, at the end of the indignation, there should be blessing. And that's confirmed when he reads about the 1335, that there's a blessing there for those that come after this 2520 period. Edson explains that once you have the key, the prophetic chain unlocks, all the dates harmonise and prove each other. You can move from one to another. You end up going to 1290. Then from there you can go to 1798. You can go forward to 1844. From there you can use the 2300 to go back to 457 BC, and from there you can jump forward the 490 to 34. So really all of this helps to prove the 457 BC date as true and correct, because they all interlock and prove each other. So yeah, basically this here, I'll write them there for the picture. So we've got a pledge. And the key, its events and times. The lock, it's Okay, so basically the years is the point. It's going to be 2,520 years before the end of this indignation. So yeah, quite something for Daniel to take in, but the verse says that by the end he understood, and then he was told to keep it a secret. So that's Hiram Edson's lesson on how Daniel was taught the 2520 by Gabriel. So that's points 1 and 2. So you can see where we've got to go. You know, next time I present, we'll see how we go. But I hope that that was a blessing to you. I hope it was clear. I might pray and then I'll open up for questions at the end. So let's kneel in prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for this beautiful day. It's beautiful whatever the weather is, wherever we are. And we thank you so much that your Spirit is with us and that you're teaching us more things every day. We thank you so much for those that have gone before us, those that have done plenty of hard work studying as well in years gone by, and that we can have a look at that and maybe learn and apply some things to our time now. We thank you for each other, for this community of believers, the blessing that it is to be part of that. Pray that you would continue to lead and guide this movement, to give light and clarity to us as individuals and particularly our leaders, Lord. Pray that you would help us to be faithful, to rid ourselves of sin and to follow the light and the truth that we have faithfully, so that you are able to give us the food that you really want to give us. So we pray that you would accept this worship of ours today and that you would be honoured and glorified. In Jesus' name, amen.